Hello, we are live with the May 22nd meeting of the Node.js modules team. I'm joined by a bunch of other people who all like modules and have spent way too much time thinking about this stuff. So we've got a jam-packed agenda today, as we usually do. Just digging that up, and I'll drop it into the chat. Would someone from the team be willing to help with taking notes today? As always, please do not all volunteer at once. Well, add your names to the attendance and we'll figure that out as we go. Hopefully someone actually takes notes. So the first thing that we have on the agenda is phase 3 update. That is a proposal from Geoffrey. Geoffrey, would you like to go over this?
Sure. I mean, it's not really a proposal. It's more just like where I think we're at based on discussions. So if here, I can try to pull it up and share it. But yeah, it's kind of more for people to agree or disagree, and then we can edit as appropriate. So. All right, can people see this?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yeah, so create require got merged in. I asked Myles if this was like what he had in mind for a better require function, and he said yes. So I just moved that. So I put it under a new heading called done. Everything else that we're still noodling on, I just put under in progress. This was like the full list before. And then these two have at least one block by people, I think. Well, I don't know if like Common.js necessarily has a block, but it's blocked kind of upstream by dynamic modules not being an option yet. So basically for both of these, I'm kind of assuming like unless something changes, the status quo will just be what ends up getting unflagged. As far as these go, no one's explicitly blocked anything in them, so they're just kind of in progress until, until they either land or until someone blocks them. So that's kind of what I was thinking with this. And I can't see anything that anyone's chatting, so if there's anything else that people want to address, speak up.
So the one that we have on here, and apologies if this was something that was on here before and it just kind of, oh, Jordan has their hand up. Jordan, please go first. I'll go after you.
Yeah, I guess I feel that, so I'm not super stoked on the stalled section. I feel like that's still in progress. I haven't had a chance to look through all the in progress items, but I hear that there's at least one block. That's an interesting categorization method, but I don't know if that's useful. I think it's still in progress. I think things are either in progress or we're not going to do them. So I don't know what's useful to put the like dual packages, for example, under stalled. I would put them under in progress because we haven't decided not to do them either. That's it.
So do you have an alternative suggestion? Should everything just be in progress?
Yeah, everything we haven't explicitly decided not to go forward with, I think should be in progress.
So I think that the difference here, and then Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that we have previously had a section called needs consensus that was like the two different categories were things we had consensus on that were being implemented. Create require was like a good example of that versus things that like we're still working through the consensus process. And I think that it's maybe fair to say that, looking at this, like a reference package root via package name is something that while we're not actively blocking, we don't have like an explicit proposal that has explicit consensus yet. So perhaps like the organization here.
Yeah, I don't mind splitting between has consensus, still doesn't have consensus, but there's also the difference between like, do we have consensus on solving the problem? Do we have consensus, like the kind of like the TC39 stages almost like there's like lots of different meanings for these things. But maybe I'm just reacting to the connotation of the word stalled, but I just don't know how much, if that, I don't see that as adding value, and I see that as actually reducing value because it primes people to think a certain way about an unresolved discussion.
So would you be okay with changing stalled to seeking consensus and moving the things from in progress that we are still seeking consensus on lower?
Yeah, that sounds fine. We can continue to iterate on that, of course, as we need. It's just, but what you're suggesting doesn't raise any eyebrows for me. The current one does. That's all.
So if we were to do that, we would change stalled to seeking consensus, and just kind of.
Well, I think we have consensus on this one. It's just stalled because of other reasons. That's kind of why. That's why this term was chosen.
So I mean, but if each thing is going to be case by case, then is having a broad category particularly useful as opposed to having a status on each item?
I think it's useful to. I think it's useful both to set expectations to people outside of our group, like this is what's going on inside the group, and also to make sure that within the group we're all on the same page. That like at the moment, I'm assuming that unless something dramatic changes, these two installed aren't going to ship. Like what we've got now, the status quo for both of these.
Yeah, but the package name resolution proposal isn't in that bucket either. The like referring to a package by name.
Well, it's just in progress until it either moves up or down. That's kind of
right, but so are those other things.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah,
sure.
What if we remove these categories as like high level categories on top, and instead had stage 3 with all of these, and as in each of them, one of the sub bullet points could be status, and
that sounds fine to me.
That we could have that I just dropped in there could be seeking consensus, implementation in progress, or stalled or done. And then
stalled could even elaborate on why it's stalled. Stalled on consensus, stalled on technical implementation, or whatever. That sounds fine to me.
So if we did that, then like that would allow us to say like dual mode, for example, is seeking consensus, whereas reference package route via package name is seeking consensus, but default the exports from CJS is stalled based on upstream concerns at TC39 or something like that.
Sure.
I'd say that's fine. Can we still keep done grouped out because we're not working on the done things anymore.
Okay. I think it makes sense to have a top level section for done, but also for like things we are definitely not moving forward on if there happens to be anything for that.
Okay, so we could have
things that aren't being worked on.
We could have like in progress, complete, and abandoned, perhaps.
Yes, that sounds fine for me.
Okay.
And again, we can iterate on this over time as we need to.
And it may be useful for us to maintain an abandoned list. Not that we're doing that right now, because up until now, we haven't really been abandoning too many things. We've been mostly punting them to later in the process. But now is like when we're probably going to be choosing if certain things aren't going to land. And it would be good from like a historical record perspective to keep the stuff we didn't do.
Well, and a reason why. Yeah,
exactly. The reason's very important.
Okay. Jeff, would you be able to take those notes and iterate on this?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Anyone else have any thoughts? Okay, very cool. Do we want to bring this up in a meeting again, or can we just like, if Jordan and I both review and sign off on the PR, are people okay with it landing? If they didn't have major concerns with how it is right now?
I mean, we may still want a quorum number of stamps on the PR, but I hope we don't need to bring it back to the meeting.
Well, for documentation, we've usually just been like, we put it up, it sits for a few days. If no one objects to it, we just land it. Is that
but this is like our roadmap, right? So it's a little bit more than just documentation.
Yeah. All right.
Let's just, just to be safe, let's bring it to the next meeting anyways, because it's not like we're in a rush to land this stuff and not everyone's in the meeting. So we have nothing to lose by doing an iteration and bringing it back to the next meeting. other
All
than.
right. Well, I would just say then if people have feedback, just respond to the GitHub thing rather than waiting until the next meeting so that I could try to just, iterate between the meetings rather than this spending more and more meetings on this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
Cool.
Next up on the agenda, oh, no one took notes.
The names field, I think, is next. Here, I'll write the to-do item.
Okay, cool. So the next one that we have is number 306, a proposal to support loading packages by own name. I know that Guy Bedford is excited to talk about this. So Guy, please go for it.
Sure, but that's great to finally be able to discuss this one. This is a long-standing problem in the JavaScript module system, is if you've got a package and you want to load another module in the same package, you're always going to have to backtrack if it's not the same folder. And then you have to know how far to backtrack. And if you move modules around, you have to rewrite all those imports. TypeScript can do a lot of that stuff automatically these days, but it's still nice to have a convenience for this to avoid that in the first place. So the suggestion was, and there are lots of ways to go about this, and I explained some of the reasons for, well, I'll try as much as possible to explain some of the reasons for going with the package.json name, is to basically, we're setting the name in the package.json anyway when we're publishing packages to NPM. So from within the package, you would require the package by that same name, getting a kind of a symmetry between the way that other packages would import the package. But a symmetry that always works out, it can't be overridden. So that'll always take precedence in the resolver. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure that this is something that happens very early on in the resolver. And there's a bit of a complex edge case here. Myles, you mentioned earlier, why not do it through the import map or the export map in Node that we're discussing? And one of the reasons why I wanted to get this on first, as opposed to later on, is because you don't want export maps to be circular. So I would personally like us to see export maps at some point support the ability. Here's an example of the feature. Myles, you were just looking at WebAssembly integration for M files.
Yeah.
In those, you have an env module that's imported, env. Now, if you wanted to be able to map that from within a package boundary, so that just for that one package, it's getting a very specific implementation of env, that's something that would be nice because of the fact that we're supporting relative paths in the exports map. If we also support non-relative paths, you could map env within a package to mean something locally or externally as well. So that could be a useful way to do mappings of names from outside the module. We've got an issue on the export maps proposal to cover that. But if we do that for the own name, you get a kind of a circularity between the main, or which came first between the main and this name feature. So that's one of the reasons why it can't really be implemented through the export map, and it's a little bit of a complex one. You have to kind of go through the logic, which I can't really do now. But if you do have the time to kind of think it through, you can look at that. So that's the reason why it's something unique. We could do it through syntax. We could do it as a special kind of relative namespace. And then the other proposal we discussed was to have the syntax of the tilde. And that was something that I believe Jordan was also preferring. And one of the reasons why I'm concerned about that kind of syntax, actually, because you end up with, if I'm going to generate my import map, I'm just going to have this import map littered with tildes for those relative names, and I personally think it actually looks quite ugly. So it's actually mostly an aesthetic argument to have this import map where every package scope has got its own tilde. I find the name clearer to read. I guess it's a bit of a bike shed on that one, but yeah. So that's the proposal, is to use the package JSON name. Any thoughts on that? And please ask questions. I know that's quite a bit to go through as well. I'm happy to clarify anything there.
So I have my hand up. So I've asked these questions on the issue. I think there's two different comments. The one is, I don't particularly care about tilde. I just threw it out there as a suggestion, but a package's own name, that would break the ecosystem, because even though NPM will refuse to install a package named foo inside a package named foo, you can just make a folder inside node modules named foo, and that will work. So that's not really a viable option. You have to have something that can't possibly be a folder inside node modules.
So it's a breaking change, yes, but that's why it's something you can do under experimental modules, because this flag is a breaking change. Right.
So that relates to the second point, which is that I do not, as I've stated many times before, I think it is a very unfortunate, what's the word I'm looking for? It would be a very unwise idea for us to introduce breaking changes between EJS and CSM, or ESM and CJS, solely because we have the opportunity at the time we're creating a new module system. This is a huge pain point for CJS. It already is. There's tons of Babel plugins that handle it. People put symlinks in node modules to handle it. There's like tons of best practices debates about how do you address this? Do you address this? At Airbnb, we've built our own internal tooling to do this. So like, this is an existing pain point. ESM is not unique to ESM. It's something I think that Node should solve for all of its module systems. And if we're solving it for CJS and ESM together, number one, ESM gets the solution for free. And number two, then we can't make breaking changes, which I think is a reasonable assumption, because when I see a bare import name, I expect that it's in Node modules. That's how Node works. And I think that it's complicating the mental model of how specifiers work. If I can rename my package JSON and all of a sudden a bunch, from, let's say if I rename my package from foo to ESLint or foo to React, all of a sudden my whole package behaves wildly differently and breaks. That seems like, to me, it seems like what we're looking for here is less of an identifier and more, which can be shadowed, and more of a keyword, which cannot be. And it doesn't, to your import map point, that's a fair point. Using the exact same token for all packages will make import maps much more complex and arguably ugly. And I think that's reasonable. It's a reasonable pushback. But I think that if we find some combination, let's say we do tilde and the package name or something, there may be some, I don't know, there may be something that we can do there, but I think that that it's something that we should solve in CJS, and it'll just work in ESM. That's my main point. I'm done.
So kind of building on, oh wait, we got hands up. Wes, go first, I'll go after you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to repeat what I said in the text chat. Like, you can't actually rely on the package name inside of the package, because the package name is liable to change and be changed by the installer. Like, you can force NPM to install like n TypeScript under the package name TypeScript, and like people do this. It's like a useful feature because it lets you take a package and then shadow it with your own fork of that package as though it were that package. And this just doesn't work in that scenario because the package name is whatever it was installed as, or at least that's how I would interpret it to be.
So the bit that I was going to add, and this is something that I guess the thought I had, depending on how we do it, it was a namespace specifically for a package, and that namespace could be like root, or it could be self, or it could be this, or like we could bike shit on whatever that symbol is. But the idea would be that it would be a special namespace that refers to the root of the project that you're in. And, this is something that we could even propose to the package name map proposal as, a mechanism within, import map proposal is something that we could propose to have the exact same kind of behavior there. It wouldn't necessarily require n number of entries inside of the map, because if it's just a reference to the root of your project, that would just be like consistent between the different environments. The thing for the CJS/ESM part of the story would be that if we introduced and supported namespaces in Node, that this feature, if there was like a special namespace that referred to the root of the package that you're in, that this is something that could be equally supported in both ESM and CJS. And it's something that could be introduced as a semver minor because it would not change any currently existing behavior. Jordan?
Yeah, so when you say root, do you mean root of the app or root of the package?
Root of the package.
So import maps have no concept of package, so I don't think there's any way that they would support that with that terminology.
They have the concept of a scope. So you can scope symbols to particular packages. So I believe that this is completely able to be done without any changes to an import map completely by tooling statically. By just putting that namespace in and giving the reference to the root of the scope of the package that it's in.
So imagine a world where you, out of your 1,000 dependencies, 50 of them use this root. You now need 50 entries in your import map for each package that uses root, and your tooling has to suss that out, and each one would scope the word root or whatever to that package. I agree with you, that would work, but that doesn't solve Guy's mentioned concern about drastically inflating the size of the import map.
And that would be where it would make sense. I guess the idea would be that like the capability is able to be done today by tooling, but that's why it would make sense to talk to Dominic and go to the people working on the proposal and bring this up as a feature, because if it is just a consistent feature and a symbol that we all agree on, then it can just be a default and not be something that needs to be in every single scope. And could just
so I think that sounds awesome and meets all, like, Myles, your suggestion or your suggested modification meets all of my concerns, as long as whatever the specifier is was not something that could exist on the file system already, and then it would be able to be semver minor in both module systems. I think that would be awesome.
And if we went forward with namespaces that were colon based, that is part of the beauty of that, is that it's it can't be replicated on Windows file systems. So we would have. Yeah, we can explore. Wes is showing some other ones. We can explore some other symbols as well. But to me, that seems like a solution that could work. Guy?
Awesome.
Yeah, I could get behind that. As mentioned, you get if you're going to have a map for each one of these sort of common symbols in your package scopes, in theory, that shouldn't be so bad under compression, because it's going to be the same name as the original name in the scope that's being mapped to, and this is being repeated. So over the wire, it shouldn't actually add that much cost. It's mainly, as I say, a kind of an aesthetic thing where you look at this map and you've got all these entries, whereas before, if we're using the name and the name matches up with the name that's installed, you could potentially not even need them because it's already in the base level map. Because say you've installed Lodash by name, it doesn't need to be mapped again within itself because it's already installed as Lodash. But I guess that's not such a strong argument at all. We did actually, I opened an issue on the import maps proposal to discuss it if a scope relative syntax would be useful. I'm just linking the issue in the chat. There wasn't much interest in it at all. So if you want to have that discussion again, Myles, certainly let us know how it goes. And then also just to follow up on Wesley's point, I don't believe the package JSON name is overridden when you install a package as an alias in npm. I think it might override it as another metadata in the package JSON when it does those.
The package JSON's name field is ignored by everything except npm install, I believe. So you can put any value you want in there, and at the moment, and that doesn't actually affect anything. It's the path on disk that matters. That's my understanding. So you're correct, Guy, that I think that the aliasing doesn't complicate it. Yes, that's right.
Okay, I pinged Dominic with that thread, and I will figure out. Sorry, I'm seeing all of the bike sheds in the chat. I'm like laughing. We've got like pound this :v this dot pound this slash is slash at self at, and then a smiley face. But I'm assuming that smiley face is meant to be some sort of symbol. I'm sorry for those who are dialing in. The creativity in the chat is not as apparent. Geoffrey, your hand is up.
Yeah, I had a more serious one. Couldn't we just combine these two ideas to solve both cases? Like you had like your package name is name, like tilde name, and then it's like it's unique, it's not repeated 50 times, but it's also not something that could be on disk because it starts with a tilde or it starts with a colon or whatever.
So can you type out what you're imagining in the chat?
I mean, just the way that this is often solved in ecosystem is exactly what you're suggesting, Geoffrey, is that like internally at Airbnb, we use a colon and then like a project name in our monorepo. And in the past, I've had it set up so that like tilde mapped to the root of all our JavaScripts before we had a monorepo. And like I've seen many Babel transforms in the ecosystem that do exactly that. For the reason you're saying, because it can't exist on the file system.
So anyway, we don't need to like figure this out right now. But I was just thinking like maybe we could throw this in the mix as another potential option that would solve both issues.
I think that would still create the lots of import map entries. And then similarly, is like Wes is pointing out, the name of the package is just as mutable as the file paths. So I think if you're trying to solve refactoring churn caused by renaming files, renaming packages is rarer, but still can happen. And so it almost seems more useful to use the same exact token in every package and have it refer to the current package, but then that aggravates the import map length. So, trade-offs everywhere.
Okay.
So we don't have to rush to a resolution on this, but as long as we can bear in mind that it's good to, I guess, match this with the experimental modules unflagging at some level, in case there are implications for the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I guess like maybe what we could reach some sort of agreement on, Guy, would be whether or not like what's the mechanism that we're exploring for it. Because if we do something like, with namespaces and it's semver minor, then that is something that we can address after flagging, or like it's less intrusive. Whereas if it's something that we want to do as a specifier, like Jeff suggested with the tilde in the name, then that's something that like could potentially be semver major, and we'll have to, examine based on those merits. I guess the one challenge that I would pose, and maybe this changes the way that we think about it, I think it's actually very reasonable to try to make this a feature that both CJS and ESM can have. And with that in mind, if we want this to be something that's usable in short order, like in the next 3 years, we do really need to come up with a solution that's semver minor, or it's not something that's going to be able to see adoption in any sort of short order. And I think that it also should be very much something we strive to make it something that can be cross-platform as well. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Cool. Yeah, I guess Guy brought up a point that I think is worth digging into a tiny bit, and we can figure out how and what we want to do for this. But we ran into some problems with WebAssembly modules. So the implementation that guy put together and like will help bring over the finish line. Gus did a bunch of the work. I did a little bit of connecting the dots. Thank you, Guy, for getting that over the finish line. The tests and everything that we wrote were taking, I believe what it's called WAST, which is like an intermediate representation AST format, and then using a tool to convert that AST directly into WebAssembly. It creates much cleaner output that doesn't have any of kind of the environment that gets built in by a lot of the compilers. So when I went and tried just building a few things and bringing them into our current implementation, it does not work as expected. And it's less of an issue of like our implementation being wrong and more that like at least Emscripten, which is the main upstream compiler being used for WebAssembly modules, is expecting you to bootstrap the WebAssembly with another bit of JavaScript code that they give you, which does a bunch of instrumentation and setting things up. So if you were to compile with Emscripten and create that kind of like wrapper JS code and then import that JS code, it would work. But then we're not really dealing with a native WebAssembly module. So if you try just taking the WebAssembly that's compiled without that wrapper, you get a warning right away that you are missing an import called env. That env import is expected by the WebAssembly, and it's actually like a resource-specific thing. So it's kind of not too different from like the need that we wanted to have like require available and having like instances or things that exist on a per instance basis for modules that are in the namespace of only that module. So like I was able to get something working by like literally hacking into our loader that variable, but and something like dir name is a good example, but like that really doesn't work because it's specific to the compiler infrastructure. So like the upstream LLVM WebAssembly compiler will not be like bundling in the same thing. Eventually WASI or something like that will make it easier to do it, but like it's very much a specific to the compiler. So there's kind of this missing bit that we have right now of giving people the ability to say like, hey, in the namespace of like just this module, I want to have like this symbol available. And I guess, Guy, what you were hinting at before was like a mechanism like this could be used to do exactly what you're talking about, which is making specific things available to the package that's not available outside of it, which could be its own root, for example, or a reference to itself.
So it kind of sounds like, no one's hand is raised. It kind of sounds like what you're asking for is globals plus one thing, which to me sounds exactly like what the built-in modules proposal is looking for. In other words, you want globals, except you want to be able to compartmentalize them to specific modules and like virtualize them essentially so that module A gets undefined and module B gets 3 and module C gets 4.
Or modules A, B, and C, all of their WebAssembly modules have env available in their namespace, but it's a unique instance of env.
Right. So
which is what Wes just brought up there.
Right. So I think like that's a important for security and virtualization and stuff. That's a useful constraint to be able to essentially decide which things you want to inject into which modules. But that's also not something that has a pattern, right? Like other than the legacy stuff in CJS that like dir name and stuff that we've actively tried not to replicate in ESM, there really isn't any convention in JavaScript for injecting things contextually into modules. So
I think, but I could be wrong, that this is something like what the Realms proposal is looking to do.
Yes, you're right.
So
and
like,
they have a lot of unanswered questions about it.
Yeah. So like in theory, if realms were in the language, Node could use a realm and spin up the WebAssembly module into the realm and prep that environment with specific things for that realm and have the WebAssembly module run.
Right, and that would be globals. And the realms proposal also, it has a concept called compartments, which is within the same realm, meaning they share like the same array.prototype and stuff like that, but they have different, like each compartment can have different shadowed globals available to it. And this was one of the constraints for the global this proposal, was that it be able to function in this way. So like essentially it's basically wrapping a module's execution with a pre-populated scope.
And further, that potentially that scope and the things that are packaged in there may be defined by user time or defined at runtime. Because, for example, that env that we're talking about there, that env changes based on what you compile. For like the capabilities of mscripton, it's essentially just like a sysroot. So they make sure that like every time you're calling like printf then refers to the env, and the env like links that to console log. And this is a lot of what WASI is looking at doing, and WASI may end up being the solution that we can use in Node for this. But it was more that I identified, you know, this pattern of like, A, we need things that are potentially scoped to the module, and B, that it might be user defined as just something that might be missing in the module system, and it may be bigger than just Node. But
right. Well, and so I also want to add on that, like, so since there are no like module IDs, in other words, there's no way to know when something is being requested from a given one module over another. There's no like userland code way I can think of, non-syntactic way maybe, to like call a function and say, hey, give me the env, and then have it know where you're calling it from with certainty and give you the correct one. But similarly, I've heard a lot of talk over the years about tenants correspondence principle, the idea that code that does something like you should be, I'm probably gonna mangle it up when I describe it, but like essentially, I have a feeling that there will be concerns with writing some code that in module A that if you extract to another module B will behave very differently. And I don't think that's currently possible. So while I agree with you that this is something that needs to be explored in the module system and the language, I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of possibly impossible to answer questions around it. Obviously the loaders can do whatever they want, but like, I don't know, it's a very big topic. So I hope that it's something that we consider like possible to defer until after unflagging. So that we can punt on it. Obviously, we shouldn't punt on it if we wouldn't be able to ship it after that time. But yeah, does that make sense?
it does. A slight caveat. I know that this is a tangent for us. But can I just say how exciting it is that we're having forward-thinking conversations right now, and not just bike shedding about like the status quo of today. I think that this may be one of the like first meetings that we've had where the majority of things that we're talking about are forward looking, and that's a pretty awesome change of pace.
Yay.
So there you go. There's my my optimism for the meeting today. I think that with that being said, I think we've maybe gotten to the end of what we can accomplish on the call today. I think the last thing that we have on the agenda is moving forward with dynamic modules. Guy, we don't really have any updates on that right now, do we?
Not that I have at all, no.
Should we just drop it from the agenda until we have an update, or we revisit it?
Well,
Sure.
what's the next step on that? And who's going to do what?
I think that the next steps on it may be like synthetic modules and cyclical modules were recently, introduced and added to the spec, and then work is being done on WebAssembly modules. So, the next step here might be doing an evaluation of how these other systems are accomplishing these things, like how is WebAssembly doing it, but like WebAssembly doesn't have the same like dynamicism that we do in CJS. But I think it's just people stepping up and doing some more work there. Wes puts that dynamic module is still on the TC39 proposal list as stage 1. So we just need to kind of revisit it. I think that a bunch of the folks, myself and Guy included, who have been focused on this one have been kind of heads down on top level await, which, by the way, for the record, is now on the agenda to try to move to stage 3 for the next meeting. And we are in the midst of spec review with reviewers right now. So my guess would be that, if that is successful in this round and we kind of have that bit behind us, maybe we can start kind of looking into this again and reevaluating it with the kind of where we're at, but I just haven't had time to dig in.
Okay, cool.
Guy, was there anything that I missed there? Is that like a pretty accurate lay of the land?
That was a pretty accurate lay of the land.
All right, cool. Open for anyone who wants to dig into that. At the very least, what we can do is, we have the Collab Summit coming up. Maybe we can, during the modules breakout, just talk about it a little bit and maybe come up with a plan to bring things to the TC39 meeting and talk to some folks if we have bandwidth for it. Oh, excuse me. I promise that I don't think modules are boring. I think that's it for today. Did anyone else have any announcements, things they wanted to bring up, grievances, appreciations?
I just updated the document that we were looking at the start of the meeting, if we wanted to go back to that, or we could.
Yeah,
wait.
why don't you screen share and we do a quick review? If we can get consensus on it right now, then we can just land it.
All right. Yeah, see that? So I think you called them in progress, done and abandoned. So
yeah.
So yeah, I just added a status line for each one, and they're in the same order as before. So that's it.
I'm okay with that. Jordan, does that appease your concerns?
Yeah, this looks much better and less pre-biasy. So this is great. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, cool. Does anyone object to us landing this with the current text?
We should have at least one objection during the whole meeting. Come on.
Well,
I
noticed
object to those objections.
I spelled something wrong, so I object to that, but I'll fix it.
There you go. Problem solved. Move on.
All right.
Okay, so sounds like we're good. 9 minutes left. Enjoy your 9 minutes, y'all. Thanks for a productive meeting. And TC39 overlaps with the meeting 2 weeks from now. So, and we also have the Collab Summit. Actually, that's probably not a bad thing to look at. We have
does it overlap? Or I think by time zones it doesn't. It's just that it's impractical for anyone in Berlin to join.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to see right now is there's a doc. Give me 1 second. I love how I've now twice been, okay, everyone go. And then I'm like, but wait, there's more. Trying to find the tentative Collab Summit agenda. Okay, so the tentative agenda, and I believe that someone prematurely optimized modules. Okay, so we have 2 different things set up for modules. We have one from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. on the 30th Berlin time. And then we have a second modules one on security modules in Node.js from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock on the 30th as well. So I would like to suggest that I will open
an issue to track those times, and we'll get the Zoom in there so that people can join. For comparison, Berlin is 6 hours ahead of us. So that 9:30 a.m. meeting would be,
It's 6 hours ahead of the East Coast, you mean?
yeah. So
9
that'd
hours
be,
ahead of the West.
yeah. So that'd be about midnight for the West Coast folks, 3:30 in the morning for the East Coast folks. That doesn't really sound very doable for other people to join.
I mean, I'm going to be awake to call into TC39 anyway, but maybe, I don't know how many other people will be up that late.
TC39 is the next week. The
Oh,
collapse
it's the next week.
Next week. TC39.
Oh, I missed that. Then yeah, that's an impractical time.
So let's just make a tracking issue to discuss timing of upcoming meetings, and maybe we'll just skip the meeting from 2 weeks from now. And if we have enough of a backlog that requires it, we can maybe do an out-of-band meeting the week of the 10th. I also want to just let people know I'm taking a lot of time off this summer because people should do that for self-care. So my schedule, I won't be around a lot over the summer. So, we'll figure that out. Not that everything stops, but I'll just let you all know the meetings I can and can't make too. Cool. Let's actually end. Any last comments before I shut this down for real this time? Okay, cool. It's a good party when you say goodbye 3 times. I'm turning off the stream now. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.